Beware. Stories can be used to sneak ideas into people's unsuspecting brains. Stories can even act as a kind of inoculation, such that people might actually recognize patterns that they wouldn't have seen otherwise, and that can alert them to dangers they might not have otherwise noticed. It can also prime them to see things that aren't necessarily so. Okay, so I'm a multiply published author of both fiction and nonfiction. I'm a former journalist and a radio personality. I have college degrees in history, Russian and Soviet studies, political science, and international relations. I'm like Tyrion Lannister, only without the alcohol or the platform shoes. Oh, and I've worked for decades in high tech as a software engineer. I can math. I can logic. I tell you that not to impress you, but to impress upon you. I'm a guy with some experience with thinking deeply and communicating broadly. And yes, I'm a guy who has formed some opinions along the way. And yet, if you've seen any of my other recent videos, you know that I've been very hesitant to bring up controversial topics here because I don't want to render these videos dated almost as soon as they air. And more importantly, it's very easy to instantly trigger a person's defenses when you start dancing around a topic they have strong feelings about. It's all too easy to instantly trigger the defenses of that person because they already know their side is always right and the other side is always wrong. And I can't hear you, la 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 la. So how can we talk about the things that we need to talk about, without triggering those mental landmines that prevent actual communication? As I said at the beginning, one way is through stories. And if you want to make sense of the crazy political times in which you live, without missing important points because of your preconceived notions about this political party or that particular ideology, there are few better ways to get a handle on things than to read dystopian political fiction. I mean, studying history with an open but critical mind wouldn't hurt. This way is certainly much more fun. I've read a lot of dystopian political fiction in my day. As a nerd in high school, I gobbled up all kinds of sci-fi, and somehow the dystopias and post-apocalypse stories grabbed my imagination far more than the books that my nerd friends were reading, like the Lord of the Rings series. So today, I'm going to talk about a couple of my favorites, which offer great insight into the realities of human nature and how things can go wrong. But let me start by telling you about a word. The word is gaslighting. I first read the term gaslighting maybe 15 or 20 years ago. The newspaper article gave a history of the term, how it came from the movie Gaslight. The movie was about an abusive romantic relationship, and it featured one character who repeatedly told another character things that were absolutely not true and challenging everything they knew until the victim couldn't tell what was reality anymore. The article was making an observation about how a certain president, who had been out of office for a little while by that point, was guilty of this particular behavior in his relationship with the American public. This wasn't about breaking promises. That's kind of a given for anyone who campaigns for political office. No, this president was caught up in a series of scandalous allegations, and he didn't just deny them, he very directly lied about every detail while staring into the camera as if he was talking to us in person and repeating the same lies forcefully and with conviction. And he manipulated the words of his questioners as if they didn't even understand the nature of what they were saying. It was the first time I had encountered the word gaslighting, but it was not the first time I had encountered the idea. I already recognized it. No, this idea and many others I had already read about in a novel called 1984 by George Orwell. And if you haven't read it yet, I highly recommend that you do. It's a compelling story that is set roughly 35 years in the future. Now, the book itself was published in 1949, and ostensibly the story took place in as you might expect, 1984. But the descriptions of the setting are intended to feel outside of time. The world is run down and used up. It occurs in the future not because of advances in technology, but because of changes in history. A series of wars has reshaped the political landscape. There are now 3 global superpower nations, and the story follows a character named Winston Smith who works for the government of one of these nations, Oceania. His job is essentially revising historical records so that they conform to how the leaders want past events to be understood. Winston is not some great leader of men. He's no dynamo of change or champion of truth. He's just an ordinary man trying to go along to get along. What distinguishes him is that he has come to realize that there's something off about society, and that alone makes him a criminal. To doubt anything about life in Oceania is actually against the law. It's called thought crime. One of the worst fears in Oceania is the idea of being taken by the thought police. And yet, Winston does not want to conform, and the more he questions his world, the more strongly his need to remain an independent thinker. As I said, the novel is very much worth reading. In fact, I'm rereading it right now. It made a huge impact upon its release, and it has continued to resonate. Admittedly, the writing style and the pacing may not be what you're used to in modern fiction, but it's still a good read, and it introduces so many vital ideas that help to put events today into very sharp relief, such as the notion of government presenting itself as a benevolent big brother when in fact it is a toxic dictatorship. The manipulation of language in order to literally change how people think about important concepts. How slogans and gaslighting can be used for brainwashing. How a life of constant work, exhaustion, and deprivation renders a population easier to control. How maintaining a constant state of war diverts attention from realities at home. You know a novel is influential when it adds words to common language. 1984 introduced words and phrases to our lexicon like Big Brother is watching you and thought crime. There's who controls the past controls the future. And war is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength. The terms doublethink and newspeak also came from 1984, although those might not be as familiar now as they were when I was in high school, which, if you're keeping score, was in the 1980s and happened to include the year 1984, as you might imagine. My personal favorite line from 1984 is a phrase that now is only recognized by people who have read the book, but it is the perfect embodiment of gaslighting in progress. When a politician who has been giving an impassioned speech about their enemies in Eurasia and their allies in East Asia is handed a piece of paper and without missing a beat continues what he was saying with, "We've always been at war with East Asia." First time I read it, chills down my spine. I definitely recommend it. It is double plus good. Now, the other book I want to talk about is Animal Farm. Usually when we use the word dystopian, we are referring to speculative fiction. These are stories that take place in some distant future or perhaps an alternate version of today. But there's one quick one I need to mention. It's not science fiction so much as pure allegory. In addition to the very straightforward polemics about politics that George Orwell was known for, he also wrote a short and sassy fable called Animal Farm. It's a happy little fable about talking animals who decide they are tired of the mean old farmer always telling them what to do, so they stage a revolution and run him off the farm, and now they get to run everything themselves. Turns out, Running everything as a group where everyone has absolutely equal say is harder than they realized. And slowly the situation changes so that what starts out as ideal and egalitarian turns into something else. Again, there are a ton of fantastic ideas here, and it's really worth reading. It's one of my absolute favorites. And from the book, one of my absolute favorite lines is, "All animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others." So, yeah, 1984 and Animal Farm, both by George Orwell, are two books that have stood the test of time because they both explore truths about human nature that matter. And they do so within engaging stories. Both are very thought-provoking and highly recommended. And you know, I have a few other excellent stories to recommend that deal with some tricky ideas. I hope you've enjoyed hearing my thoughts about these two, and we'll talk about some others next time. Take care, and thanks for listening.